Hello and welcome back. Today we're looking at a transcript of a video interview with MK Tali Gotliv. It covers judicial standards, the military, the Pegasus spyware affair, and even Likud party politics.
Yeah, this is an incredibly dense piece of material. It's packed with some really high-stakes allegations, a lot of insider baseball. So let's just get straight to work.
Absolutely. Okay, first lens. Structure and thematic cohesion. The material currently suffers from a lack of thematic prioritization, which really dilutes the impact of its most serious allegations.
That's a very direct opening. I have to say, I read through it twice and I felt a distinct sense of whiplash. It moves at just a breakneck speed. So what's the specific weakness with the flow?
The weakness is, well, I'd call it a stream of consciousness approach. The narrative just jumps between these huge unrelated topics with no real transition.
Right.
I mean, she goes from a specific road accident involving Haredim and Kaplanists
The anti-government protesters, yeah.
straight to the chief of staff's letter on service length, then the military censor, then Gaza strategy, then the Pegasus scandal, and she wraps it all up with internal party primaries.
It does feel like a rapid-fire assault. I guess my question is that the point? You know, a look at all the fires burning strategy. Because the whole deep state narrative kind of relies on showing how everything is connected.
That's a valid point, and it's often a deliberate choice. But the connection has to be drawn for the listener, not just implied. Right now, it's hard for the audience to hold on to the core argument.
If everything is urgent, nothing is urgent.
Exactly. The listener gets whiplash. The cognitive load is just too high when you switch from a tragic car accident to, complex military draft legislation in a single breath.
So you're spending so much energy just trying to figure out where you are, you stop listening to what's being said. Okay, so what's the actionable suggestion here?
The suggestion is to group the arguments, put them into clear, distinct pillars, something like civil double standards, military political conduct, and then maybe legal overreach.
Okay.
You're letting the listener open a mental folder, fill it with evidence, and then close it before moving on.
That sounds much more digestible. It turns a list of complaints into a structured indictment. So how would that look in practice? Let's take that road accident you mentioned.
Perfect. Here's a concrete example. The segment starts with that Kaplanis versus Haredi road accident. It's a really strong emotional hook about media bias, a visceral story.
Right.
But it needs to be fully concluded before she pivots. The way it is now, she just suddenly asks what is happening with Herzi Halevi, and it feels
Incredibly abrupt. It's a jarring shift. You go from a civil tragedy on a highway to high-level military policy. The emotional weight of the accident just vanishes.
precisely. A better structure would be to group that road accident critique with the later discussion about the Force 100 video leaks.
Okay, the reserve unit abuse allegations.
Yes, both of those stories are about selective enforcement and media narrative. By grouping them, you build a civil double standards pillar. You're showing a pattern, not just scattered anecdotes.
That makes sense. It builds a case instead of just listing grievances. Here are two things I'm mad about becomes, here's a systemic problem. So what about the heavier stuff? I'm thinking of the Pegasus section. It felt huge, but kind of buried.
That's our second concrete example. The whole discussion on Pegasus and the comptroller's report is so dense, so legally complex. I mean, 13,000 warrantless wiretaps.
A staggering number.
It is. But in the material, it's just sort of sandwiched between a debate on Gaza tactics and a fight in the Constitution Committee.
It gets lost in the noise. One minute it's Qatar and Gaza, the next it's massive digital surveillance. Then we're on to something else.
Exactly. Dedicate a specific block to the erosion of privacy and legal oversight. Let the listener process the gravity of that 13,000 wiretaps claim. You can't ask the audience to care about the collapse of democracy and then 2 minutes later her polling numbers in the Likud primary.
It almost trivializes the surveillance claim by putting it next to everyday politics. So grouping isn't just about tidiness. It's about giving each argument the weight it deserves.
Correct. And that actually brings us right to the content itself. You mentioned the Pegasus claims and the attacks on military brass, which leads directly to our second critique.
This feels like the core of the issue with a lot of political commentary today.
It is.
Let's talk about substantiation of claims versus rhetorical. The topic sentence here, while the speaker clearly has deep insider knowledge, her reliance on aggressive rhetoric often overshadows the factual basis of the argument.
This is such a common trap, especially for the firebrand types. You have the knowledge, you know the truth, but the passion just takes over. Where do you see that happening most clearly?
The weakness is that she frequently asserts malice or incompetence without providing the connective tissue of evidence for a lay audience.
Okay.
For instance, calling the chief of staff's letter a political maneuver. That's a huge accusation. She just says he didn't learn anything, implying this conspiracy. But the causal link is just asserted. It's not explained.
I noticed that too, and calling the state attorney's office a crime organization, that's a powerful soundbite. It's a headline, but without laying out the specific procedural violations first, it risks sounding like hyperbole.
That's the exact risk. It preaches to the choir, but alienates anyone who's skeptical. You lose the middle ground.
So how do we fix this? How do we keep the fire but add the foundation?
The suggestion is to adopt an evidence-first, label-second approach. Present the factual contradiction, the procedural failure, before you apply the emotional label. Lead the audience to your conclusion.
I like that. It's an investigation, not a rant. So can we apply this to the chief of staff's letter? Because that's a really specific claim she's making.
Let's do it. Regarding the letter about extending service to 36 months, instead of just dismissing it as political, first explain why it's suspicious.
Okay.
Does it contradict a previous Army assessment from 6 months ago? Does the timing specifically force a coalition crisis over the Heritage draft law? The listener needs to understand the mechanism of the sabotage to agree with a conclusion.
That's a crucial distinction. If you explain the mechanism, the audience feels smart for connecting the dots. If you just shout the conclusion, they have to take your word for it.
Exactly. It turns the listener into an insider. Here's another example with the military censor. The speaker claims the censor is detached for allowing a headline about the economy of armaments.
Right. She argues it serves a defeatist narrative. But is the connection really established?
Not quite. To strengthen it, she should explicitly contrast that approval with a specific time the censor blocked a similar story that didn't fit the narrative.
Ah, comparative evidence.
Right. If she could say, they allowed this headline saying we're out of ammo, but last week they blocked a headline about a heroic stand in Khan Yunis, then the argument becomes irrefutable. It shows the double standard in action.
That's a much stronger way to frame it. Now, speaking of accusations and name-calling, we have to talk about the style of the delivery.
That brings us to our third critique, tone and audience alignment.
I have a feeling I know where this is going. There were some colorful word choices.
The topic sentence is, the combative and colloquial tone, while engaging for a base of supporters, potentially alienates the undecided listener who is looking for serious governance solutions.
I definitely stumbled on some of the language. There is a moment where she calls a former police commissioner parsley.
Yes, parsley.
And she tells the host to shut up, even if it's playful, and uses words like stupidity and madness over and over. But I wonder, isn't this her brand? MK Gotliv is known for being unfiltered. Are we risking polishing away her unique voice?
I get what you're saying. Authenticity is key. We don't want to turn a firebrand into a robot. But the weakness here is that this kind of mockery, it lowers the perceived objective authority of the speaker. When you're discussing state-sanctioned spying on citizens or the strategy for a war, calling people parsley makes you sound less like a serious legislator and more like a heckler.
Exactly. So it creates a dissonance. You're holding these files on state corruption, but you're talking like you're in a schoolyard fight. It makes it harder to believe the files are real if the person holding them isn't acting serious.
Exactly. So the suggestion is to elevate the diction to match the gravity of the accusation. Use sharp language, not rough language. You can still be devastatingly critical without being juvenile.
Okay, so let's see a concrete example of this.
Let's look at the Pegasus report segment again. The focus shifts to her mocking the Deputy Attorney General for filing a restraining order too late. She says, what a bummer for her.
It felt a bit petty, like she was laughing at a clerical error, not the intent behind it. Ha, you missed the deadline.
Right. The critique would be so much more devastating if it stayed focused on the impropriety of a legal official even trying to block a state comptroller's report.
I see.
Instead of, what a bummer, frame it as a chilling attempt to silence oversight. It's not she failed, it's she attempted to subvert the law. That turns a personal jab into a constitutional crisis.
That really elevates the stakes. It makes the deputy AG look dangerous, not just incompetent. What about that section on Gaza? The word stupidity was doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
It was. When discussing the day after and the potential involvement of Qatar or Turkey, she says, what stupidity of statesmen? What stupidity, stupidity? It's just repetitive.
Yeah, it loses its punch. It sounds like she's running out of words.
A more effective critique would dissect the specific security failures of the 2005 disengagement or the intelligence risks of Qatari involvement. She knows why it's stupid. She just needs to say the why instead of just the word.
So the goal is to channel that anger into precision, a sharp scalpel, not a blunt hammer.
Perfectly put. Now let's move to the final part of the material. Critique 4, the conclusion and the so what?
The ending. That was interesting. We went from high-stakes military treason to primary polling numbers.
That's the core issue. The topic sentence here is, the conclusion of the material dilutes the national urgency established earlier by pivoting to personal political ambition and internal party dynamics.
I really felt that deflation. We spent all this time on existential threats, Hamas, rogue generals, judicial corruption, and then suddenly we're talking about whether she's the first lady of Likud and her rivalry with Miri Regev.
It just trivializes the whole state of emergency tone. If the country is truly being run by a deep state crime organization, then her polling numbers should be framed as a tool to fight that, not some vanity metric.
It's like the director yelled cut and the actor started talking about craft services before the camera was off. But politics is politics. How can she talk to her voters without losing the thread?
The suggestion is to bridge the personal political segment directly back to the policy critique. If she's going to discuss her popularity, it should be framed solely as a mandate to fix the specific broken systems she just spent 20 minutes identifying.
So instead of the banter about who's the most popular woman in Likud, she should pivot.
Exactly. She could say something like, the reason I'm polling well is because the public sees that only this level of direct confrontation can expose the wiretap scandal and reform the Attorney General's office.
That turns the vote into a weapon for the cause, not just a popularity contest. It validates her supporters.
Correct. And there's one more element in the conclusion, the reference to the weekly Torah portion, Parashat Bo.
Remember where you came from. It was a nice sentiment, but it felt a little tacked on, like a standard sign-off.
It was, and that's a missed opportunity. The whole piece is about accountability and abuse of power. That spiritual reference is a strong thematic closer if you connect it directly to the duty of public servants.
So, remember where you came from becomes a warning to the powerful, not just advice to the listener. Precisely.
Parashat Bo teaches us about leaders who harden their farts. I am telling the chief of staff, remember where you came from. It ties the spiritual closing right back into the political critique. It unifies the whole piece.
That would leave a lasting impression, and it would solve that whiplash problem we started with. It wraps everything up.
So, to recap our critique, we discussed the need for tighter thematic grouping to avoid whiplash, creating those pillars for civil, military, and legal issues. We talked about grounding explosive claims in evidence before using the label.
We also addressed elevating the tone from rough to sharp. To maintain authority, focusing the vitriol on policy, not personalities.
And finally, we emphasize making sure the conclusion reinforces the urgent national themes, not drifting into personal politics. The ending has to match the urgency of the beginning.
This material has incredible raw energy. It's clear she has access to information and a perspective that's unique. With these shifts, it could go from a fiery rant to a truly devastating indictment.
We invite the listener to refine the structure, particularly the grouping of the arguments, and resubmit the material. We'd love to see how this new evidence-based approach.
I'd really love to see that new draft. It sounds like it could be a defining speech.
Until next time.